Daniel Penny found not guilty of negligent homicide in the death of Jordan Neely. We were just hearing reaction from Jordan Neely's father and other supporters. The jury reached a decision after more than 20 hours of deliberations. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here with my co-host Kayleigh McEnany and Emily Campagno. Also joining us today, Molly Line, Fox News correspondent. Great to see her. And Larry Kudlow, host of Kudlow on Fox Business. Also great to see you, Larry. CB Cotton on the story. CB, it is unfathomable at this point, as two black women on screen, that this has come down to a race issue and not about Daniel Penny's innocence. Like, not guilty.
Well, I can tell you, Harris, the protesters who are here outside the courthouse are very, very upset right now. They're chanting no justice, no peace. And we actually just heard in a press conference from several of Jordan Neely's family members, Jordan Neely's father, Andrew Zachary, saying he misses his son and he believes there is a two-tiered system of justice. But I also want to talk about the moments in the courtroom when we heard this not guilty verdict. For the first time, we saw some emotion from Daniel Penny when he learned his fate. He smiled in that courtroom. His defense attorney started clapping, and this was obviously a very joyous moment for the defense. But for Neely supporters, there was anger. When the defense attorney started clapping, Jordan Neely's father said, quote, "Are you trying to get effing killed?" An activist in the courtroom also started making loud threats, one of them saying, quote, "It's a racist effing country." So tensions are particularly high here at the courthouse. Jurors this morning, they went back to deliberate for a little more than an hour before they went back to the deliberations room. I want to paraphrase what the judge told jurors. He said something to the effect of, no juror should surrender his or her honest view of the verdict just because you want to make an end to deliberations. I hope that helps. So we know jurors went back to deliberate at around 10:15 this morning, and they came back at 11:30 with a verdict of not guilty of criminally negligent homicide. This all comes, though, after jurors last Friday were deadlocked twice on the higher charge of second-degree manslaughter. After they came back the first time deadlocked, the judge read an Allen charge and sent them back to deliberate. Then they came back in the afternoon, deadlocked again. And at that point, the prosecution made a request for that higher charge to be thrown out. The defense objected to it and called for a mistrial. Defense attorney Thomas Kniff said he thought it'd be coercive for jurors to continue deliberations. Nonetheless, defense attorneys told me they were trying to stay level-headed about today, hoping that this decision would come. And now we know, of course, jurors have found Daniel Penny not guilty of criminally negligent homicide. And I want to share this from our Fox legal researchers about that top charge, second-degree manslaughter, which again was thrown out. I've learned that if DA Bragg does try to bring another prosecution on the grounds of second-degree manslaughter, it may be considered double jeopardy, so he may not even be able to do it. But for now, a tense courthouse here as both sides remain divided.
CB, I appreciate all of that. Thank you. I do want to ask you the size of the crowd out there and if it is looking decidedly different than it did earlier. It was a pretty big number of protesters. What does it describe it to us now?
I would say there are about 24 protesters here in support of Jordan Neely. This morning we had about 5 protesters in support of Daniel Penny. We saw a small clash. Police quickly moved in, and the supporters here for Neely are still here. They've calmed down a bit, but we are expecting things to possibly pick back up.
Have you seen any movement of the city's mayor, Eric Adams, or DA Alvin Bragg coming out to sort of deal with potential animus in this situation? That's not the word I'm looking for. Inciting is what I'm looking for here.
We have not seen New York City Mayor Eric Adams today, and we have not seen Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. We do know that Bragg sat in for one day of the trial. To my memory, that's the only time he was here one day of the trial. But protesters here are now blaming New York City Mayor Eric Adams for this verdict. So there's a lot more to watch for this case.
And why do they blame him specifically? Are they saying?
I think they're not saying specifically why they're upset at him. I think perhaps they're upset by some of his recent statements where he said that a jury of Daniel Penny's peers will decide Daniel Penny's fate. And that's what has happened here at the courthouse. These were everyday New Yorkers on that jury who take the subway every single day. Most of them said they take it, if not frequently, they take it sometimes.
CB Cotton, always great to be on screen with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Harris.
So, Larry, did America watch a city maybe pull back from something that would have harmed everybody? And that is, you punish heroes who step up. Is that what we just witnessed?
I think so. I think he deserves a medal. I don't want to, Kaylee and I talking about it offset. Absolutely. I mean, I think once again, Alvin Bragg gets his ears pinned back. The guy never deserves to be district attorney. He should be impeached if such a thing were possible, but it's not in New York City. You have to, and by the way, the police, let's give the police some credit in a lot of these things. We'll get to this, I guess, but we're on the march for this killer of the United Healthcare.
Well, they've arrested a man fitting his description in Pennsylvania, so we've got to figure out if that's him. So we'll get to that
Ray
in a moment.
Kelly, once you have facial ID, you're in good shape. But coming back to this, New York needs this. We have to show that we're capable of preserving the safety of people and businesses and families and schools in this city. Truthfully, in the last several years, New York has failed to produce that, as so many criminals have been caught, sentenced, and left. They just left. They just, no jail, no bail, no nothing. And of course, they tried it with Donald Trump, and that didn't work so well either. And if they keep up with the Trump nonsense, the appeals court will knock that down as well. Bragg has lost every single thing he's done and every sense of perspective. Every sense of perspective for the people who live here, the people who visit here, and the people around the world who look at New York as the leader. For heaven's sakes, let us establish public safety.
Emily, what precedent does this set?
Well, as a New Yorker, it sets the precedent that now people hopefully will feel encouraged again or emboldened again to step in when everyone around them is terrified. The reality is that that jury saw this for exactly what it was, which is someone coming to the rescue of everyone else terrified in a car. And those of us who live here, who take public transportation, experience this kind of stuff all the time. And it's because of the lack of law enforcement, because of this crippling, ridiculous district attorney that we've been subjected to an explosion of crime on the streets at the hands of those recidivist criminals that law enforcement can do nothing about because their hands are strapped too. Those that are racializing this or protesting vociferously, to me, do not represent in any way the actuality of what occurred on that subway and this trial, which sees no color. No one cares about a color whatsoever in a subway car. No one cares about a color whatsoever on the streets. I know I speak for myself as a New Yorker and for every other New Yorker I know, because we are faced with the realities, not the enjoyment of being behind a computer screen.
When it comes to
That's
crime.
right.
That's not about race.
That's right.
That's
so
right.
those protesting, I just have to say, if I may, one last point, that similar to the, for example, riots that we saw on the West Coast when the arrest records came out and you actually realize, oh, none of them even live in that city. So I wonder, the loudest voices that have racialized this, that think that they're sort of taking up a flag. Right. I wonder, do they live here? Do they take the subway? So I think, to me, when I heard the verdict, it was a sigh of relief. And as an attorney, it was a major sigh of relief that the legal massive error and injustice that the judge did by dismissing the first charge and then saying, but we're going to preserve the second, and no, it's not coercion. Thank God it cured that, sort of.
Molly, what does it tell us, though, that the reason that we got to the spot that Emily is talking about was because at least one person was a standout and wanted to find this guy guilty of second-degree manslaughter. Yeah. Like that, we can't just say this was a pure not guilty. We got here because somebody before last Friday said, oh, no, he's guilty of killing. It's manslaughter. So there was this point today with Jonathan Turley, and he said, look, if they don't come down with a verdict and this just comes back as a hung jury, they can try again.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to partly what Emily was talking about. Here we are, we're in the season of peace, and now I have a lot of questions about peace. Will we see peace across the city tonight? Will there potentially be riots? Will those riots potentially be, as you talked about, other people, other actors that look at this as a cause that can be put on as theater all across the country? The other question I have, about if this offers some sanity, some hope for people that are riding the subway. Will people feel brave enough to step in? Will that help to make the city more peaceful? And I wonder about Daniel Penny and his peace for the rest of his life. You know, he's a young former Marine who stepped up in one moment, and now his face is out there for the rest of his life. And while there are many people that believe that he is at the height of heroism, there are all these others, some actors that we may see in the city tonight or in other places across the nation. So this is something he'll be dealing with for the rest of his life.
So, Kaylee, I am curious. I've not lived in the city before, but I have watched the crime explode, as Emily was describing, from across the Hudson River. I wonder, though, what this means for the rest of the country, because crime happens everywhere. So it's not just about being locked underground in a subway car with a bunch of people and a man who's threatening to harm others, and someone will die today, is what Jordan Neely said in that subway car. But it's everybody who might have a hero among them who wants to come forth. This changes, I think, the conversation.
You're exactly right. I predict we are going to see a national chilling effect on Good Samaritans across the country, just like we saw the Ferguson effect, a national chilling of policing across the country in the wake of what happened to Darren Wilson. So despite winning, this is not a victory. A victory would be a DA never bringing this. A victory would have been a judge dismissing this. This did not happen. It's great news. It's not a victory. But what happened today was as important as what happened on November 5th of this year. President Donald Trump prevailed in that election. Today, justice prevailed. And I am not overstating it by saying this was huge. It was a victory for justice. But think about Daniel Penny and the road he has ahead. He has civil litigation now that the father has filed. He has untold legal expenses that he had to pay for this case. Who's going to pay those? He's a 26-year-old guy who served his country honorably. The media, I read in the New Yorker this weekend, I wanted to throw my computer against the wall because this angered me so much. This casual line in a piece they wrote, the subway dancer strangled by the ex-Marine. This guy was convicted in the court of public opinion, despite being a hero, despite all of those on the subway calling him a hero and thanking him for his actions. To the point Larry mentioned, he deserves a congressional gold medal. Eli Crane has put forward legislation to give Daniel Penny a congressional gold medal. I want to add to the day one priority of Donald Trump by saying, get behind this, put a tailwind, give this guy a congressional gold medal. He is nothing less than a hero. Justice prevailed, but his life thus far is still ruined.
I want to bring in Jonathan Turley now, legal scholar. Jonathan, you were with me as the story was breaking last hour. New set of questions now around this racially charged threat on the streets of New York from a few people. And I asked C.B. Cotton, tell me how many are there. Many more were there earlier today. Not guilty for Daniel Penny. They're angry. They're hinging everything on skin color. And we haven't heard from the mayor yet. And we haven't heard from DA Alvin Bragg to calm things down. If you are a citizen in the city of New York and your business is burned, your car is burned, I think you have a legal case against the city of New York if they don't step up and try and stop the threats that have been coming for hours this morning.
Well, here is the interesting thing here is that we haven't heard from Bragg, but he's heard from the people of New York. Behind that mob outside the courthouse is the rest of New York. And I think that we've already seen that New Yorkers are fed up with the policies of Alvin Bragg and many others. This jury is New York. They were selected from this population. They didn't just immediately acquit. They deliberated, they divided, and ultimately they came together on the lesser charge. Keep in mind that this lesser charge, they could have secured conviction by just deciding that he had what was called blameworthy conduct. I mean, it's an incredibly low standard. And they unanimously said no. Now, that's after, of course, rejecting the higher crime, the more serious crime, last week by simply deadlocking. But they did not reach a unanimous decision in that. So there is a possibility we had one or two holdouts last week that changed their mind, obviously, this weekend. What's also interesting about this verdict is it does have some blowback on the recently filed negligence case by the Neely family against Penny. Now, those cases represent a threat because they're under the lower standard for torts and civil cases of a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt. And so what's interesting about this is that this is basically a negligence standard. Many of us have been critical of the use of criminal negligence, but they were not able to secure a conviction here. Now, they will have a lesser standard of proof in the civil case against Penny, but going into that case, this has got to give them a lot of following wind.
Do you think Alvin Bragg would go for another bite at the apple? I mean, there's been some talk about double jeopardy, but not necessarily, because this case wasn't declared a mistrial before they went to the lower charge.
Right, and this is the issue that we talked about earlier on the air. Normally, when you have a deadlock, it is an unresolved criminal charge, and the prosecutors can come back and bring it again. In this case, the judge dismissed the charge. And so the argument could be that, well, that's different than a simple deadlock. At the end, practically, I don't see how Bragg can do this. I mean, he just had a jury say, we didn't think he was even guilty of blameworthy conduct, and you're going to bring a higher charge against him? I mean,
Twice,
it would be absurd. But much of what Bragg does, most prosecutors would not do. So we're not making any assumptions here. But this is a great verdict. It's the right verdict, and it comes from people of this community.
Jonathan, thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.